Hi, Anson Parker. I'm here from Charlottesville. I work at the University of Virginia Health Sciences Library, and we're going to talk a little bit about indoor and outdoor accessibility and mapping with our blind, low vision, and mobility challenged community in Charlottesville. First, a little bit of history. We started working a couple of years ago at Code for Seville, which is a Code for America group, and we're working on housing routers and housing navigators for people. And we had a bunch of community members, and we were like, well, how close are these houses to bus stops? And we started looking into that because people were like, well, how do I get from point A to point B? And the first maps you do, and I know this is redundant here a little bit, but sidewalk mapping is really hard, right? Roads are all connected. That's the way they work. Sidewalks are all not connected. That's the deal. So we started looking at that, and Charlottesville, our map, our hills are like this, and our sidewalks are garbage. So we started looking at ways to do our mapping, and and fortunately we had some really good partners. We worked with VisitAble.org, which is a group that does wheelchair accessibility review. That's all they do. And then the National Federation of Blind and the Virginia Department of the Blind and Envision Impaired also jumped in to help us and brought in trainers. And if you're going to do any of this work, save yourself a ton of time. Like, work with people who really care about the outcomes. Like, otherwise you'll get answers, but they may or may not be that useful. Which will bring us to the next slide, which was like, we were really excited because we're a bunch of nerds, and we were like, man, we're gonna LiDAR this stuff, and we're gonna data science this, because that's what we were good at. We had all these hammers, and the fact is, we just ended up burning up undergrads. I mean, we just shoveled them at the problems, and it worked. I mean, that's how things got done. There was no elegance to it, but there was a staggering amount of time, and it worked really, really well. We were able to get, and it got really, we got creative stuff out of it too. I mean, some of the undergrads came in, and Hollis Cutler, she did this QGIS project that ended up like blowing all of our minds. And she recreated the maps and made sure everything linked before we had the maps worked out. She had come up with some actual pretty elegant solutions, which if anybody wants to talk about, we ended up with an API driven product out of that. The other tool that we were really grateful to have access to, and this is out of the Taskar Center, Nick Bolton wrote this, and this kind of gets towards how you do quality control, right? We use the task manager in there. And the task manager, if you haven't used it, typically you break up a series of maps into grids. But what Nick and the Taskar Center did here was a lot better than that, which is that they looked at maps and were able to break up the maps based on quadrants related to where the sidewalks actually are, which is really helpful, because otherwise, if you're just breaking things down into squares, tracking how things move can get complicated, and it's not intuitive. And by breaking down the map into actual street segments, we were able to get much better quality control, and that was pretty exciting. So this is an old screenshot, but this shows you where we've actually mapped out the data, and then where we verified the data, right? And so that, again, that is pretty critical. You can do it once, but having somebody put a second set of eyes on things really, for quality control, is pretty important. And so this was really pretty effective for outdoor navigation. If you're in a wheelchair in Charlottesville, you're miserable. It's horrible. But we know why it's bad now. We can point to where it's very bad, and that's an improvement. We can say it's especially bad here, here, and here, whereas before it was kind of like, well, it's just pretty bad. Indoor mapping is a whole nother animal, and it's awful. Really bad. Most mapping you do with, your location, you gather with satellite data, right? You've got GPS. Indoor, that doesn't work. You don't have satellite access. And the tools for mapping indoors aren't great. OSM Indoor Edit is pretty good. And I actually just saw that there's some new tools. If you go to OpenStreetMap and Google indoor mapping, There are a couple of new tools that came out in 2022 that I hadn't seen, and I was pretty excited about that. We actually ended up in the hospital. We worked with, and it really is interesting. This is kind of an important note, but if you're in a wheelchair, you really prefer elevators. If you're blind or low vision, you really prefer stairs. And so for providing routing data, that's really important to be able to suss out those details. And you can obviously do it manually, but we did actually try to approach this initially from a data science perspective, which got us into some really cool tools. The University of Cyprus has a tool called Anyplace, and this leverages, and we used Anyplace and TrackR, both are open source. They use the magnetic sensors in your phone, and actually this is really cool. They work off of the rebar in buildings, which is kind of neat. And so buildings have like a thumbprint, a magnetic thumbprint that you can use to get about 15 centimeter accuracy. And we combine that with the altitude data, and altimetry is also typically garbage data. But if you can get a fixed point that on the outside, then you can transpose that afterwards. Like, you're always going to get bad height data. Barometric pressure is going to throw it off, but you can track. If you know where a fixed point is, you can then branch off of that and get about 1 foot resolution on your data, which was enough to figure out if you're in stairs or if you're in so we could actually start finding stairs more automatedly in buildings, which was kind of cool. Just people have these apps on their phone, they can walk around, and we can track whether or not they've gone upstairs or whether they've used an elevator reasonably accurately. And that was kind of cool. So we could start actually getting that kind of data. Again, we tried to do, so our experience with LiDAR indoors, let me start out with what we ended up doing for blind and low vision people. We used the touchmapper.org tool. And this was originally designed for 3D printing. I work at the University of Virginia, so we've got the drama department actually had some really great tools, and the architecture school had some great tools. And we used lasers, and this was super effective. And I really can't, I meant to bring this map because it was kind of fun to make. But in about 15 minutes, we can make maps. And this was for a trade fair. And this is one of the things that kind of, I think, is exciting about OpenStreetMap and mapping data in general, is that we could take a base map that was produced by TouchMapper and then augment it pretty quickly to have, like, this is where the trade fair desks were. And the idea is that really you should be able to whip out a tactile map quickly and affordably, right? Most blind, low vision people don't need a tactile map for, like, just day-to-day use. It's for when, like, a job fair or like a trade show, and it's like, okay, it's a place that I know, but there's new stuff in the environment. How do I get around here? How do I use that? How do I find that information? And so really this was, a $2 product. Over at the drama department, they had this kind of this vacuum press, and for about 50 cents, we can duplicate these. So you can, like, there's just almost no excuse for not being able to produce this kind of content. And I think that's pretty exciting. Again, LiDAR, total failure. LiDAR can give you reasonably decent accuracy, but the user interface is just not there. It's not up to anything that's usable. We worked with a bunch of blind programmers, actually, which was super fun. If you want to know if your app works, get a blind person to use it. You'll find out how your user interface is. It's a very cool experience, but it just, frankly, LiDAR just didn't do anything for us in that case. LiDAR with wheelchair accessibility was a little bit more nuanced. It was okay. Like, we were doing accessibility reviews of rooms. And so a room like this would probably be okay because the stairs, the accuracy you're going to get is about 3 centimeters. And that's not good enough for wheelchair. But, like, those stairs there are probably, like, 15 centimeters, 10 centimeters, something like that. So it's probably enough. It would probably catch that, but it really isn't good enough for a lot of other stuff. We used a couple of apps that were pretty, Polyscan was pretty good for measuring, and it was better. Like you could go in and maybe you didn't remember to measure something. And so you got a LiDAR scan of the room and you go back and you're like, oh yeah, I forgot to measure that thing. Like now I can look at it and look at it a little bit more accurately. It was good, but it wasn't great. And it was far from acceptable outside. I mean, but indoors, it was, I don't think they're using it. I mean, again, we were partnered with VisitAble.org on this, and I don't think they're using it. I think they have gone back to measuring tapes and photographs for most stuff. I think, we've talked about trying to crowdsource it, but it just, again, you can go back, you can measure stuff. It's kind of cool, but it's just, you really need higher accuracy, and I think anything over a half inch is going to be kind of a barrier if you're in a wheelchair. And the iPad Pro, which is what we were using, and other commercial LiDAR, just not going to give you the resolution that you need. So yeah, the LiDAR just not that great. I mean, there's a ton of learning curves. The workflows weren't great. I'm sure it's improving, but I haven't seen anything that seemed really worth the effort. Thanks. Yeah. Oh, and if anybody wants to talk about this one, I'm just putting it out there. I've been working on this foam.space grant. It was awful, but if anybody has any thoughts on it, it's a proof of location product that it's interesting, but I haven't found a single. Well, no, we have a use case for it. It's for voting, but I haven't found any use case for it that really worked. Anyhow, I wanted to thank Lyrasis for some of the grants, the Center for Civic Innovation for supporting some of this work, Lena Wen, who was a UVA student who just rocked out, Maitri Patel, who did the indoor hospital mapping, Maggie Cawley and Jessica Bueller were awesome. And if anybody has any questions or any thoughts, feel free to reach out. Thank you.